Hello there, Mandy here. Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart is not just a podcast. It's also a book, a free online grief group, and a one-on-one private coaching practice. If you are interested in learning more, visit mandykapehart.com to find out how restorative grief can help you heal heart, mind, body, and spirit. Welcome back to Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart. You are listening to episode 237, titled For the Weary with Becky McCoy. What if the reason your spiritual life feels impossible right now is because you've been handed tools that were never designed to function well with your grief? Today on Restorative Grief, I'm joined by my friend Becky McCoy. She's a writer, spiritual director, and someone who understands firsthand what it means to live inside deep loss while still reaching for gentle hope. Her new book, In the Company of the Weary, invites weary, grieving people into spiritual practices that actually honor their capacity instead of overwhelming it. Hey everyone, welcome back to Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart. I'm your host, Mandy, and today's conversation is a tender and very anticipated one. We're talking about what faith and spiritual practices can look like when you are simply too tired to perform your way through the healing work you need to do. And I'm so honored to be joined by my friend Becky McCoy. Her upcoming book is called In the Company of the Weary, and it offers compassionate, doable spiritual practices for people who are living with grief, burnout, and emotional exhaustion. So, Becky, my friend, I'm so glad you are here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here. I always love chatting with you.
Thanks. I'm glad you're here because your approach to grief work has been so informative for me as well. And we've talked over the years about how grief just reshapes everything that you encounter.
Yep.
What was the moment in your life that you realized your spiritual life was being impacted and needed to look different in this new season?
I often tell people the story of the night my husband died. So my son was 2, and I was about 8.5 months pregnant, and my husband had just died after this really short, intense battle with a cancer that nobody really knows much about. And I tell people, like, I laid in my bed and I stared at the ceiling and I was like, hey God, you know what, you messed up this time. Like, I don't want to try and be in your business, but like this, you you failed. And that, I didn't realize how shocking that would be to people. And I think um every time I tell that story reminds me of how I was just so worn down by being a caregiver, by the anticipatory grief, then by the actual grief and loss, that I had no pretense anymore. I was not trying to say any right things or think any right things. And just, I was so in survival mode that I could be really honest. And I think that there were many other moments, but that's the one that comes to mind, that, oh, I am functioning and approaching my spiritual life very differently than a lot of the people around me, and even maybe differently than I had even just a couple of years ago.
It's so relatable because the idea that someone would still be shocked by our disappointment and almost disgust with
Yeah.
God, just like,
Yeah.
are you kidding? What is wrong? Yeah, aren't you the one that should know all the things and have all the details worked out so that I don't have to experience this kind of intensity and confusion about my situation?
Yeah. And even like, okay, so say I'm going to be widowed young, like with a fresh 2-year old, and knowing that I'm going to give birth within the next month, like, maybe we could have looked at the calendar again, right? And done this a little differently. Because this is not it.
I think that really challenges that wonderfully comforting notion that there is a perfect plan in place and everything in his timing, in the sense of, does that mean fated and predictive? Does that mean we lack any influence whatsoever? There are so many wonderful spiritual questions, but when you are grieving, they simply feel like new wounds.
Yeah, and it's a real exercise in restraint for me when I am talking to people who are like, I've been working so hard, it's my turn to buy a house, or I've been single for so long, it's my turn, as if our behavior or um, the choices that we make mean that we deserve something,
Mm,
or that like blessings are earned things. And most of the time I bite my tongue because I know that they don't actually want a real conversation. But sometimes I'll look at them and be like, oh, so what did I do to deserve losing all of it?
right. The
And just,
conversation
yeah.
doesn't go both ways.
Right. Yeah. Because then, of course, people backpedal and get really uncomfortable,
Yeah.
which, like, yes, you also made me uncomfortable. So welcome.
Yeah.
Um, that that's just not how it works. Like, if you get all of the things you hope and dream for, that's wonderful. But it's not a direct result of earning it or deserving it or
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah. Well, in that note, the word weary in the title of your book feels so precise.
Hmm.
What does weariness mean to you that people might misunderstand as well?
Yeah. We talk about weary as in being tired a lot. Um, and I think it's so much deeper than that. Weariness is just when you are at the end of yourself. Physically, don't have energy. Mentally, can't see things clearly. You have been dealing with and navigating so many emotions that it's just a muddy puddle, right? Like i- weariness is so pervasive in all of you spiritually. You find that you can't pray anymore, or you don't connect with God in the ways that had always worked before. Just every part of you is so burned out that you don't even know where to go next because you don't have the energy to think it through or decide or brainstorm.
Yeah. It's that bone deep collapse sense of unclarity,
Yep.
fogginess, and just almost disconnection from everything around that matters.
Yeah, that you're just existing. No part of you is really living or connecting or having any meaningful experiences or interactions.
Yeah. What was it that started to stir in you? It's been quite some time since you lost your husband.
Hmm.
What came up in your life or culturally that made you realize this was the book for now?
There were a lot of little things along the way, but the experience of I went to divinity school, and that was an experience of realizing, oh, I grew up thinking that the right way to practice a Christian faith is to read your Bible and go to Bible study and go to church and serve and volunteer and basically give all of your time and energy to the church. And I started to realize how, first of all, that comes from making church in the image of capitalism. And that's not great because a church should be a respite from that. Um, but also realizing just how fundamentally ableist it all is. I was dealing with grief. I have always dealt with anxiety and depression. Uh, and then during COVID, I got diagnosed with ADHD, which should have known a very long time ago. But girls in the 90s didn't have ADHD. That
We
that was
didn't
a
have
thing.
it. What are you talking
Yeah,
about? We're
yeah,
capable of everything because we're
yeah,
special.
yeah. Exactly. So I think like I just reached the limit of myself. And I realized, oh, these things aren't working for me anymore. And because I'm not able to do them, does that mean that I'm not faithful? And then that turned into, well, what if I couldn't read or had problems with literacy, so I can't study the Bible? Does that mean I can't be faithful? If I can't physically go to church, or there is no accessible Bible study, does that mean I can't be faithful? And so I just kind of let myself ask all of those questions and realizing how ridiculous all were. Because that I just if God has those kind of prerequisites, I'm gone. I'm out. You know, that just is not kind or loving. Um, so I started to explore, well, what other options are there? And since I happened to be in divinity school, this was all before COVID, but I was in divinity school and, taking church history and New Testament and Old Testament classes and all of these things and really getting anchored into my place in modern society and culture and how different that is from the Enlightenment or from the first century church or from, any of these different eras, and how the expectations of what it means to be a Christian now are very modern ideas. And so I was exploring and digging into, well, what are the more ancient ones? What did it look like before people had access to books or could communicate with people outside of their own town? Um, and that was really eye-opening and realizing, oh, there is a real rich tradition here that I maybe thought was cute. Like not, but it's so rich and valuable. And so I decided to start exploring these different practices. And I did, they, I feel like changed everything fundamentally for me and how I approach my spiritual life and faith, especially when it comes to dealing with really painful times in life.
Yeah. This is one of the reasons I've always loved talking with you because those were questions I asked as a fairly young person, and mine were framed more of if it's going to be true about God's character, it has to be true for every human who has ever walked the earth. And
Absolutely.
if I can't unequivocally say yes, this would apply across the board, no questions, no accommodations, then it can't be true of God's character. The amount of pushback and rage that
Oh yeah.
raises in people
Oh, it makes people so uncomfortable.
because we're challenging the performance and to your
Yeah,
point the capitalism, the productivity of it.
right.
We're challenging the clean certain conclusions.
Hmm.
We're expansive and willing to go into the discomfort of, oh well, actually I guess there is no right answer. Now what? And
Yeah.
what a what a jarring invitation for someone to receive. But that's also what I love about this work you're producing. You use this phrase, gentle spiritual practices, where
Hmm.
those questions don't feel gentle, but they actually are so inviting. What makes a practice feel gentle versus performative or productive?
I think so. One of the threads throughout the whole book is to just approach everything kind of as an experiment and with curiosity and just notice what comes up. I'm very honest about my experiences. Like the first practice in the book, I thought my spiritual director was off her rocker. And like, I was like, there's no way this is going to be spiritually transformative. And then it was. And then there are other things that I'm like, oh, people have been doing this for centuries. This is going to be so beautiful. And it just never resonated or connected with me. In its traditional form, I then experimented with like, different versions of it to find what did work for me. But there's just no prescriptiveness about any of it. And that can be really overwhelming because you want to know that you're doing it, quote unquote, right. Yeah. But there's no right. It's just figuring out what resonates in your soul, what helps you connect to God, um, what is comforting and helpful to you. And we're so accustomed to that being like a recipe, and it's just really not.
Yeah. I'm wondering of all of those practices that you share in the book, but also what you have learned and shared about just personally, was there anything that was especially personal or kind of costly or worrisome for you to write about?
Oh yeah.
Anything
Probably
vulnerable in there?
yeah, at least one thing per chapter. So the ended up writing the book to connect each spiritual practice with if you're feeling this way or if you feel like you need this, The idea being someone can open up this book and not necessarily, try this spiritual practice and it will fix all your problems. But just if you are feeling so tired and so disconnected, try playing around with this. See what happens. See if it helps you see your situation a little differently, or maybe helps you identify what is so difficult right now and what you're looking for. And so, more than anything, I hope that it'll be a toolbox for people to find what works for them right now. And in the future, that might change, and what works now might not work then. But just to reframe our ideas of spiritual practices from being recipes and projects to being opportunities to be curious and explore.
Yeah, there's a real adventure and courageousness quality to what you're talking about, because there's so many people who would tell you and believe, if I don't follow these steps, I will be failing at my faith practice or failing at my grief work, and
Mm.
completely bypassing both and struggling. And so I'm just curious, as someone who has felt those things and walked through that, what do you want to gently push back on for the person that feels like they are failing at what they're doing?
That's real. That's really hard. And really scary because you can see that what you're doing isn't working. But maybe, and as was the case for me, I had been in faith communities for so long that were built on the fear of things changing,
Mm.
of your understanding of God changing. Um, and one thing I keep coming back to is just because your understanding of God has changed doesn't mean that God has changed. And that making that very specific distinction between God's character and what I know of God's character uh, is a really good starting point. And that feels really scary in the moment because for so long they've been the same. And then once you can kind of see that there's a little bit of a difference there, realizing that we're just asked to be human and to live and to explore, and it's not a pass or fail assignment. It's knowing what does it mean to be human, because when we accept that pain and suffering is part of being human, not a sign of failure. Our humanity is not something that we have to overcome. We're not meant to outhuman ourselves until we are like little mini gods, right? And really accepting and understanding what it means to be human is so freeing that we can appreciate our own unique, wonderful differences. And that includes how we relate to God and how we practice what, this doesn't just pertain to Christians. It's whatever faith you're part of or not a part of. You have the freedom to find what that looks like for you.
It really sounds like your understanding of spirituality and just the interconnectedness of spirituality, whatever that means, and humanity has softened and really become so gently interwoven
Oh
through the.
yeah, 15 or 20 years ago, me would be horrified. Like, but grief has a way of doing that.
Yeah.
If you are serious about the grieving process, it will change how you view everything else because the bubble has burst and it can't ever go back to being neat and tidy.
Yeah. I think that's what's so interesting about grief work, particularly in adjacency to the church, is recognizing there is such a distinct before and after. Now we know with loss, the before and after is very clear with anyone, regardless of their spiritual practices. But it almost feels very separate when you have that layer of a strong faith practice or a strong set of beliefs that really hold you in a community, because there's this distinctive failure. And I say that with the most love. There's this shortcoming of spiritual communities around people who are deep in grief and in burnout and loss. What do you see as missteps most often in helping communities or in church communities for people who are grieving? And how do you gently, as to
Or
the
not so
or
gently.
not so gently, how do you, where appropriate, where you have access, intervene and offer a
Mm.
better path?
The starting point is always that pain makes people uncomfortable.
Mhm.
And especially Americans and especially Christians um, will do whatever they can to protect themselves from their own or other people's pain. And I was actually I'm in a doctoral program for spiritual formation and soul care. And I was talking about this week in that when you are in a faith community and you are dealing with pain and suffering and people kind of disappear because they're just so uncomfortable, that is really painful and it magnifies the loss when this should be a place where you are comforted and cared for and you see people putting their own comfort ahead of um the relationships.
Yeah.
Um and so that's kind of where I start and just helping people to see that you're not a successful Christian because you're comfortable. It actually has nothing to do with it. That's another one of those modern things that we've added that is completely irrelevant. Jesus called people to care for the orphans and the widows. Orphans and widows do not only exist in movies. They're real people in your community that you don't even realize are there. They're not necessarily people you can help through a missions organization or um, some program that your church does. There are people hurting everywhere, and learning to accept and sit with someone else's pain, even when it is so uncomfortable. And I still get uncomfortable by other people's pain. Like
Yeah.
that's not, I'm not saying ignore it, but learning how to allow the discomfort to happen is really is really the starting point. I'm really curious about and want to spend some time researching and learning more about if faith communities welcome grief, if they make their communities hospitable to pain and suffering and say, you know, your pain is welcome here. Not just you're welcome here, but please leave your pain at the door, but all of it is welcome here. That will create not only stronger communities, but flourishing individuals that, you know, I really strongly believe that spiritual formation is held back by avoiding pain and discomfort. And I really want to figure out ways to help clergy and lay pastors and anyone involved in leadership in faith spaces to really examine things they're probably not even aware that they're doing and be more intentional about sitting with other people's pain and discomfort.
Yeah. I mean, you're asking faith communities to stop bypassing
Mm-hmm.
with scriptures and with promises and hopefulness. I think the
Mm-hmm.
really great example of that are Christian funeral services
Mm-hmm.
where it feels so uncomfortable because we're just celebrating and
Yeah, yeah. Funerals
refraining
are
from
important.
lamenting.
We're
Yeah.
supposed to be sad. It's sad. Like
Yes.
just
It is
let it be
devastating.
sad.
Yeah.
I Someone at my husband's funeral, I'm holding a newborn. My 2-year-old is running around. Someone comes up to me and says, "How wonderful that he got to like live into his dream profession and start a family before he died."
I just need anyone who's not seeing my face right now to
Yeah,
understand how wide my eyes got the second she said how wonderful,
yeah, yeah. And
because she should have
that
followed it with, for it is for me to give you this $5,000 check.
Yeah, right. Yes, to babysit your kids.
What?
Um, she was so lucky. I was just so tired. Um, yeah, because it was like, what? Did huh? And like she just kept like, what a blessing for him. And now I wish somebody would say it to me so I could be like, oh, for him to like leave his whole life behind
Would it
and
be
leave us
cathartic?
stranded.
I can say it to you and you can practice with me if it would feel
Oh
good.
no, I mean I've said it. An older woman came up to me in the grocery store one time and said, "Oh, a boy and a girl. So you're done having kids?" And I looked at her and said, "Well, my husband died this year, so yeah." Because I was just so over it.
You're like,
Um,
you're a stranger. I owe you
yeah,
nothing.
no,
You felt the need to comment on a woman's, sexual practices. So
yeah,
I guess
yeah.
here we are.
Uh-huh. But
Good
it,
for
yeah,
you.
it's the same with, God has a plan. Everything happens for a reason.
Yep.
It, yada yada, et cetera, et cetera. Like, first of all, that's not what any of those things mean.
Hmm.
Second of all, just because it sounds nice doesn't mean it's kind. It's actually usually very wounding. Um, and also you just don't have to say anything.
Yeah.
I forget who it was. I don't remember who it was, but somebody once called it the ministry of sitting down and shutting up. And
Mm.
like, yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah. You were talking about helping church communities and faith communities figure out how to do this in a way that is very caring and open to pain and suffering, which I'm in 100%. So you figure it out or you want to plan it, call me.
Yeah.
Um, but it makes me think about trauma informed practices and spirituality, and it's not a matter of having a congregation full of counselors and trauma informed pastors. It's a matter of people learning what it looks like to have trauma informed spirituality and a trauma informed approach to humanity. And so I'm curious, for you, what does that look like in everyday life? Because we don't go around being sarcastic to people
Yeah.
all the time,
Yep.
sweet listener. We just occasionally, it needs to be said, and it's
Yep.
okay. But there is a layer to it where we are practicing it for ourselves and
Mhm.
softening and creating access points for others to approach trauma informed spirituality and practice. So, what does that look like?
Yeah. Well, what it does not look like is um, classes in professional training programs.
Yeah.
Mostly because there isn't time, and a lot of programs are trying really hard to make sure that grief is covered
Yep.
in pastoral care or in um, therapy and counseling programs, but there's just not time. And that's really unfortunate, but it is the nature of how we do schooling. And people kind of automatically jump to, well, there should be a class or there should be a book or there, right? But it's just like healthy spirituality is not hoarding knowledge about God. Healthy grieving and being able to navigate trauma is not doing whatever the non-school version of getting a psychology degree is. Like, yes, it's helpful to learn and to understand, but really it's practicing checking in on your friend, or if you see someone, a stranger crying, like, hey, you need something? You okay? Can I sit with you? Not, can I pray for you? Because
Can I give
that's
you
bold.
this
That,
tract?
yeah, that's
Yeah.
bold. But like maybe getting them lunch or a coffee or just, being aware that someone is having a hard time. And noticing a lot of it is just noticing. Ooh, this makes me really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I don't want to do this. I don't want to step in. And there's a difference between uncomfortable, avoiding discomfort and caring for yourself. A good friend died at the beginning of this year, and I was not able to provide the support of a friend that I wished I could have through his illness because it was so similar to my husband's. And he had um a very young child and a spouse, and it I had to do a lot of my own work before I could touch that. And that's not because I was uncomfortable. It's because I knew that the time of year, the circumstances and everything were very triggering.
Yeah.
And so being aware of that and doing what I needed to do, but not disconnecting. And that's the hard part. We had the unfortunate situation. My father-in-law was a pastor for 35 years. And when my husband died, I'm not exactly sure what the elders of the church meant to say, but what they said and how it came across was go fix your grief and then come back and join us. And I know those people well enough to know that I don't think that's exactly what they intended, but they were approaching it from a purely knowledge, trying to do it right.
Pragmatic.
Yeah, perspective instead of what do you need? What, how can we help? Um, yeah, so it's just recognizing that there really aren't right answers. Not everybody needs the same thing.
Yeah.
But being curious and kind and noticing when you are defaulting to avoiding or disconnecting because of discomfort.
Yeah. What you said earlier reminds me of that concept of remember that you may always be entertaining angels and how
Mm,
you care for people. And I think often about that because, one, if I literally ran into what I thought is an angel, do you think I'm going to run toward them and say, "Can I pray for you? Baby girl, can you pray for me?
yeah.
I need some
Yeah.
interceding right now." That's
Yeah.
where my first thought goes to,
Uh-huh.
almost in the regard of, may I go sit with you? May I just be in your presence?
Hmm.
Right. And so there's this um, already much more humble approach to caring for someone who is hurting that we, I think, can learn from very practically. We do not have answers. I often tell people I might be a grief expert, but I'm not an expert in your story. I
Hmm.
might know facts. I am constantly teaching people like you are saying are who've gone through classes and didn't get grief education and don't understand it, how to approach people and how to recognize there is no true expert in the process. There are experiences that we can all share and learn from and continue to share and continue to learn from. But I think um, the very pragmatic approach is so difficult because we want it to be clean. We want it to be
Yeah, it's not
applicable.
like, oh, you tore your rotator cuff. You need to have
Right.
surgery, and then you're going to take these medicines every 4 hours. And then in, this many weeks, you'll be back to normal and you'll do some physical therapy, but like really you can expect grief is just not like that. It fundamentally shifts the journey that you're on, and people need to be willing to change direction with you.
Yeah.
And there's no there's no Google Maps for grief. There's no you will arrive in 45 minutes. Your destination is on the left. It's just we're just going and we're walking each other along, and we need to be flexible to go where the road turns and not try and forge a path where there doesn't need to be one.
Yeah. I'm curious, when you thought about the person sitting across from you reading your book, what reader were you picturing? Where are they?
I thought a lot about myself 15, 20 years ago, working so hard to get it right. I thought a lot about friends of mine who felt so frustrated so often that they didn't connect with God through Bible study
Mm.
and question what was wrong with them. And I just thought about all of the women in our generation and age group who see the women who have gone before us and how they sacrifice so much of themselves to do it the quote unquote right way. And yet it wasn't healthy. Um, and how I feel like this is true in like every area of our lives. We're trying to find a healthier, better way to do it for ourselves and for the generations to come. And just thinking about, as a spiritual director, sit and listen to people and just hold that space. Sounds so woo-woo. But I don't know any better way to say it. Just holding the space for whatever they are carrying to exist
Yeah.
and really wanting the people who read this book to feel that way and
Mm-hmm.
feel that whatever they are struggling with or are frustrated with or are feeling disillusioned by, okay, sure. Let's let's try something different.
Yeah. Let's name it. It's real.
Hmm.
Hmm. Okay. I know I would keep you here for hours if I could, but I can't. So I'll just ask you this last question. For the person who's listening, who is bone weary and feeling very hopeful, or maybe curious, or maybe hesitant about your book or this conversation we're talking about, because we know we're opening lots of doors of opportunity to get griefy. What is what is one gentle piece of permission you want to leave them with?
Just notice. Notice when the grief wells up inside of you and just let it be. Notice when something feels really special. Notice when you have questions and notice when those questions are followed by the very fear-filled what ifs. Um, and you don't have to have any answers. You don't have to figure out what that means, but just to notice and just let yourself start there.
Mm. Well, I would like to take a moment to notice how special this conversation is to me.
Mm,
I so enjoy hearing your heart and talking with you and recognizing kindred spirits when it comes to all of this nonsense that we're facing and trying
yeah,
to make sense of it and raise kind children and be kind humans in the process. So,
yeah.
Becky, if anyone else is just as enamored with you, where can they find you to get to know you and your work?
Well, I'm on social media at Becky L. McCoy, and my website is beckylmccoy.com. So pretty easy.
Excellent. Well, if you are listening and you haven't followed Becky yet, go and do that right away. I'll make sure all the links are in the show notes. And her book, In the Company of the Weary, is going to be available where you get books. When is it available? Remind me.
May 12th.
May 12th. So you're
Yeah,
hearing this a little bit early. So now you can go pre order it and make sure the sales are through the roof. Thank
awesome.
you. Thank you so much for being
Thank you,
here.
my friend.
You're welcome. Thank you for listening to episode 237 of Restorative Grief. My conversations with Becky always leave me feeling warm, cared for, inspired, and excited about trying something new in my own spiritual practice, which is not a small comment to make for someone who is very used to grieving and asking big questions without answers. So if you heard yourself or something familiar in this conversation today, I hope you will take time to follow Becky on Instagram, reach out for spiritual direction with her, or get a copy of her book, In the Company of the Weary, from wherever you buy your reading material. It will be very worth your while. If this is your first time listening to Restorative Grief, thank you so much for making time to be here and for giving yourself permission to slow down and to listen to something a little different that might help you find some comfort and some care. You can learn more about restorative grief at mandykapehart.com and certainly find out about coaching opportunities or become a patron of the show if you would like as well, because every patron gets access to a weekly workbook that helps take these interviews and essays and apply them more intentionally to our lives. Thank you, as always, to my past patrons and present patrons and all of you future patrons who might join. I can't wait to see you there, and I'm so grateful for your support. And as always, one last thing before we go. Please remember, the only solution for grief is to do the work of grieving. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week.